with small hope in the big city. Make big cream or stay broke, but it's no pity. Where opportunity pass you quick as light flashes. I done seen mere belief burn to ashes. Had a small crew, we roll tight and we all move. Broke all rules, we saw life through a small view. Navigated these ghetto blocks without a German. Some of us so work, some of us work the honest earning. We all had dreams to make it, we all had a strategy, but gradually reality brought us down like gravity. Wanted the American dream, but never realized the dream was a scheme to just keep us trapped in airline. Crossing over concrete, slam dunking on crates. Now we slamming these bars, trying to save our race. Do it for the sisters, gotta do it for the brothers, cause we know living in America, the system don't love us. Trying to intertwine and grind and keep my mind up on the cabbage. Still spit that mathematics, the civilized and savage. Cut from a different fabric, bred from a different breed. Product of my environment, not a product is heat.
Born in the NOI, so with that bow tie, you can find us in the hood, we don't just go by. Can't nobody stop us like we at the free throw line. Farrakhan, the leader, and Elijah gave the cosign. Left him sitting in his seat, when we in the street, this is our ministry. Try to save our people from their misery. Let's buy back the hood, unite against our common enemy. You don't believe in that, you ain't as real as you pretend to be. With supreme mathematics, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, we about to teach the savage that we're trying to do is damage. But today we ain't gonna have it. We ain't gonna stop until his kingdom is established. Until being righteous is a habit, and we all live in lavish, money, luxury, apparent. Gotta have it, that's all over the planet. 193 million, I take Quran. Get it.
Chicken wing. I can't.
What's up, everybody? How you doing? What's up? All right. Welcome to this event. I'll let Gabby start us off.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gabby. I am an organizer with the Justice Center in El Barrio. I am also a dancer, and I'm so thrilled to be welcoming you here to the People's Forum, which is an educational space, a cultural space, and an incubator for our movements, a place for working class people to connect, to organize, and to build a better future for us all. And I'm so proud to be introducing Hip Hop Lives, our celebration of the 50th anniversary of hip hop that we're kicking off with a 3-part class series, starting with today's class on the working class roots of hip hop. Give it up. So I'll say a little bit about the Justice Center, then I'll pass it back off to Cam. We'll talk a little bit about himself and what today's event is about. So the Justice Center is a dynamic space for community organizing in East Harlem, El Barrio. And as of January, we are now housed in the First Spanish Methodist Church on East 111th Street, which is also known as the People's Church. You may know this as the church that the Young Lords occupied in 1969. So today, the Justice Center continues to organize free events for the community every month, from emergency mass distribution when we had the air quality emergency to our signature liberation forums, where we come together and talk about the many different issues affecting the working class and how we are building people's movements today. So that's a little bit about who I'm with and who's also helping to build up this summer series of Hip Hop Lives. And I'll pass it back off to Kim.
Thanks so much. Yes, we're very, very excited to start this series. We're very excited to be at the People's Forum again with an amazing event that I'll give some more details about. But first, my name is Cameron. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I've been in this organization for about 6 years now. Really so proud to be a part of an organization that is stretching from coast to coast and beyond, really trying to make inroads in any struggle that affects working class people, whether it's the union struggle, the struggle against police terror, the struggle for black liberation, the struggle for the rights of immigrants, the struggle for LGBTQ people's rights. All of these different things tie together. We have a common struggle. And the important part is we believe that culture, the study of culture, the participation in culture, the appreciation of culture is an extremely important task of any revolutionary. We believe that culture is an important tool for the liberation of our people and people across the world. And part of the fight against imperialism is the fight to fight off the types of values that they are trying to put onto us, to fight off the types of common sense and the ideas that they try to instill, but actually have a people's culture thrive, not just be suppressed, but we want a liberated culture. We want a liberated people and liberated politics. All of those things go together for us. So we really want to welcome you into the space. We're glad to be in collaboration and in the space with you. And I want to talk a little bit about the Hip Hop Lives event. So we decided to do this series because it's important to point out that 50 years later, since 1973, when it said that hip hop started, the spirit of rebellion, the spirit of youth, the spirit of continuously pushing forward, it lives, it continues. Of course, when hip hop starts, like any form of art, people don't know if it's like a fad, people don't know if it's going to go away, but it's true that through so much repression, through so much judgment, through so much censorship, through all of these different things, hip hop has continued to stay alive, has continued to carry many types of messages, and we're really excited to dig into this. We've been able to, start with Bronx walking tours, which are still ongoing. We're definitely going to continue doing that. You can check out the NYCPSL to see some information about that. That's our name on Instagram. So you can go ahead and check that out, hopefully participate in the next one, which is going to be coming up very soon. And there's information on the side right there. There's a poster. There's many places that you can learn about this, but we're doing a 3-part class series, starting with this first one, which is going to be very excellent, talking about the roots of hip hop. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Gabby.
And I'm just going to pass it right off to Claudia. But before I do, I want to give her a proper introduction, even though she said to keep it brief. I'm going to give her her praises. She's an incredible person who, has been a community organizer, a pastor, a leader here at the People's Forum. She's the co-executive director. She has built up several organizations, has contributed to many key cultural projects here in New York City, has really devoted her life to building up people's movements and having culture always be at the heart of that. And so it's my great honor to welcome Claudia up to the mic to teach you this class today. I'm ready to learn. Take us to school.
You would think I'm gonna rap or something, but I'm not. How's everyone doing? Good? Amazing. I'm very excited to be invited to do this, because one thing that Gabby did not say is that I am from the birthplace of hip hop, from the People's Republic of the South Bronx. It's very specific. From the People's Republic of the South Bronx. And it's very, very important to be that specific, mostly because there's context that gives birth to culture. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I don't want to ask, but I'm going to ask anyway. How many of you are actually practitioners of the hip hop culture? I could have sworn that you were. Because hip hop culture is a way of life. Yes or no? And we're going to talk about the differences between hip hop culture and the rap industry. There's a very strict difference. So I want to hear maybe some of the expectations you have for the class so that I can share what my objectives are and just make sure that we're kind of in tune with each other. Does that sound okay? All right. So I'm going to take about 2 or 3 folks to share just like, what do you expect to get from this session? I can volunteer people too. I am fucking good at that shit. So you volunteer yourself or I will volunteer you. There you go. You know what the deal is, Angie.
Yeah. My name's Angie. One thing I hope to get is the impact of hip hop on our culture, not just in the Bronx, but where it stands today. So over time.
Okay. Anyone else? 2 more.
Hi, I'm Bree, and I think I was hoping to learn about like the socio and economic things that were going on at the birth, like around the birth of hip hop, and like what led to it.
Perfect. 1 more. Brother, you gotta tell me your name. I like the hat, like the whole swag.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, my name is Risha Rue, but in the hip hop community, my hip hop name his Grandmaster Iron Fist. And I guess, how can I say this nicely? I work with the vanguard of the hip-hop movement. I'm one of the people, me and my family actually had been able to survive the catastrophe of 2016. I've stayed on, me and my children, as prime examples, as many other, legit organizers were and still are, proud representatives of the hip-hop community, as also as members of Zulu. But I'm a little different from the average person in the hip-hop community, in that from almost the beginning, I was so inspired by KRS-One's talk about the temple of hip-hop, that somehow the connection between that and what I was doing with hip-hop at the Boys and Girls Club, it just brought a lot of vision and purpose to my life. It led me towards knowledge of self. It led me towards spirituality. It led me towards my ancestors. And at the same time, working with the leading minds in the conversations that we're having about the elements.
Okay. Well, you have a lot to share
Yeah.
in this session. So just we're not going to be debating on who's the best rapper or who has been the best MC or what coast has it or did it best. We've had that argument in TPF and different spaces. It's not a good one. I just got to say New York rules. But, and we could debate that. But what we are going to talk about is precisely the socioeconomic and political conditions that birth the hip hop culture. We are going to talk about the originators of hip hop. And I just want to put forth that there are many people that did not make it to the mainstream. So there are a lot of people who participated in the development of hip hop whose names we don't know. And we should keep that in our heads. There are those who are listed in records, but there are many who are unsung heroes and heroines. I forgot how you say it. Heroínas in Spanish. We want to talk about the educational and mobilizing power of hip hop as part of a legacy of cultures of resistance. So we can't talk about hip hop culture without talking about funk, without talking about rock and roll, without even talking about punk. Like hip hop culture, or you can't talk about it without talking about mambo even, or salsa, which were also part of that era, of that moment. And so we want to talk about it from that perspective as a culture of resistance and resilience and resourcefulness, because poor people have this in common all over the globe. Poor people are resourceful. What does that mean? We make do with what we have. Do and more. Are folks okay with that? All right. So I was given this clicker. Let's see how much of a clicker expert I am. If not, Vegeta's gonna support the tech. What's up, Vegeta? All right, so we're gonna go on to the next slide. I told you. All right, what was happening in the world between 1965 and 1973? And I know the time slot, the time period is kind of big, but there are very specific things that were happening that contributed to the socioeconomic and political conditions that then gave birth to hip hop. So would you like to share some of the things that you might remember or that you know based on history? Right here and then back there.
American invasion of Vietnam.
Large-scale rebellions in most U.S. cities.
Large-scale rebellions in U.S. cities. What else?
Yeah, a lot of people's uprisings and at the same time some brutal repression. So in that period, there's like Malcolm X is killed, Martin Luther King, Cabral over in, Africa. So many different sides of that.
So we see a lot of U.S. interventions, imperialism. We see the putting of dictatorships, the coups. There was a very specific coup that happened in Chile in 1973. And there were some economists that were funded by no other than the Ford Foundation to go to study in Chicago. That's why they're called the Chicago Boys. And then implement neoliberalism in Chile. And then that being spread worldwide. Now, let's start with neoliberalism. Can anyone give a very simple definition of what neoliberalism is? I'm gonna start volunteering.
My understanding is it's kind of like a political and economic austerity, like a cutting of social assistance programs and things like that in order to enrich the capitalist class.
That's part of it. Anybody else wants to add to that? Anyone else? Damn. Okay. You're leaving me alone. I see. We're also talking about the deregulation of corporations. We're talking about the privatization of what was at some point public. Okay? And there's obviously many more elements to it, but when we are talking about economy, that's basically the rule. The increase of corporate rule, the increase of privatization, and the deregulation of the market. And that comes with values that are rugged individualism, that are based on competition, not collaboration. Obviously, there was also something that was happening at that particular moment in time, which was a capitalist crisis. And every time there's a crisis within capitalism, capitalists tend to build a lifeboat for themselves. Neoliberalism was the lifeboat for capitalists in that moment. It was a project that they understood would actually sustain the capitalist system. Are we okay so far? All right. So what was neoliberalism's impact inside of the United States? Because we want to get to the point where we talk to the South Bronx, but we're trying to kind of create a path towards that. Vegeta, por favor. All right. So one of the biggest impacts that neoliberalism has had, because it continues to happen, one thing that we should all know is the free trade agreements. So in the 1990s, there was a free trade agreement, 1994, that took a lot of the manufacturing jobs to other countries. One of those primary countries was Mexico. So what happened there? A lot of the factories that were once placed in the United States take off, and corporations start making a killing because they don't have to worry about unions. They don't have to be worried about paying salaries that are connected to insurance. They could exploit the life out of the global South. But what that means in the United States is that there's a decrease. And before that free trade, obviously there's more. Neoliberalism starts creeping its head in the 1970s. But what you see here, what do you see here? And then there's a decline, right? US manufacturing levels, this is what it shows. There's a decline in manufacturing jobs in the textile industry. I don't know if you've noticed, if you go like this to your shirt and look at the ticket, you most likely won't get a USA made shirt. Most likely that shirt was made in Guatemala or in China or in India or somewhere else that is not the United States of America.
They also, around the country, they used to say made in New York. And they were made right here, right in this area. And look at the difference now.
That's right. So this Hell's Kitchen, it was precisely a factory. It was a community of factories, the textile industry. And so, again, we have a decrease in the production, that is the things that are produced within the United States. A perfect example of that is Detroit. the Ford Company and other companies, right? Detroit declared itself in bankruptcy. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of what produced income in that city was taken overseas as a result of neoliberal policies. And so let's keep that in mind. Can we go on to the next one? So what that meant was, part of what it meant in terms of neoliberalism and its impact was that folks would work more, but the wage stayed the same. So there's wage stagnation that happens. The productivity increases, and it increases not by a little, it increases by a lot. So it's not that people aren't working, people continue to work, but the compensation stays the same, right? What do you think that creates for communities, for like everyday people? What does this do?
Extreme poverty. Poverty?
Because another thing that the economic crisis, a phenomenon that I forgot to mention, is this phenomenon of stagflation. Does anybody know what stagflation is? I see a lot of this, but I don't see anybody raising their hands to give me a definition. I'm gonna start volunteering people. All right, brother. We're doing this collectively.
Is that where like products, their prices keep rising, but wages stay stagnant?
So one of the things that actually, one of the causes of the crisis was precisely that, stagflation. It's something we're seeing now too. So like, let's think about the parallels of the conditions that created hip hop culture and what's happening now, right? Because culture doesn't happen by itself. It is a product of your social, economic, and political environment. People produce culture as well. And then there's culture that is imposed on us as well for those reasons. All right. Next one. I'm just gonna say, hit it, Vijata. All right. Another aspect that starts to develop is the phenomenon of mass incarceration. President Nixon declares a war on drugs, and it has a very specific target. And the very specific target is the black community and anti-war activists. And I have to mention those in the same breath because it's important to mention it. And for any use or selling, and it's for a very specific type of drug as well, which is a type of drug that poor people either consume or sell. Are folks following me? Because I see a lot of blank stares. Okay, so we're talking about the population of prisoners here, and you see a rise right after the war on drugs was declared. The war on drugs, if we look at text, was practically a war on poor people. That's what it was. It wasn't anything more than that. It was an open war on poor people that didn't only take place here in the United States, but was also taken to parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, and was funded by the United States of America. There's a very good journalist, Gary Webb. Write that down if you don't know about Gary Webb. Gary Webb was the person that actually exposed the CIA's role in drug trafficking. And somehow he committed suicide. But it's a really good book to read. It gives you like the CIA's connection to trafficking drugs in South America and the Caribbean, the pathways, the ways that the CIA funded basically thugs to do that work. I see you're trying to and then here.
I think it's important to point out there were giant political movements in this country at the time. This is the time of Black Power. It's the time that the anti-war movement felt that they forced the U.S. to take its troops out of Vietnam in 1973. It was the time of the women's movement. The LGBTQ movement was coming up, the disabilities movement. And these responses, the war on drugs was an attack on the anti-war movement. It was certainly an attack on the Black Power movement and any kind of self-determination that was being shown.
And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide.
I just want to know the name of the book by Gary Webb.
I could tell you the name of the book later. I know it's Gary Webb who uncovered that. Probably if you Google him, he'll come up. All right, let's go on to the next. So this is really interesting, right? Like you see the distinctions here, right? So you see murder, sexual assault, robbery, assault, burglary, drugs. The majority of what constituted imprisonment after the war on drugs was what? Drugs. No other crime was as big as drugs. And what that did was everything that we talked about in terms of dismantling the possibility of movement building, the criminalization of communities, all of that. But it also stole the possibility, the potential of communities to thrive. It took, and very specifically, it took a lot of men out of their households, out of their community. That's what the war on drugs did. And it did it very intentionally. Let's go on to the next. So one thing that happens, as my comrade was talking about, there's a height of movement, specifically like 1966 to 1968, 1969. And then you see the assassination, the persecution, the imprisonment, the dismantling of Black liberation movement specifically in this country. The dismantling and the beheading of it. You have the killing of Malcolm X in 1965. You have the murder of Martin Luther King in 1968. So they beheaded movements. We have the incarcerations of hundreds, because we have hundreds of political prisoners. Rest in peace, Mutulu Shakur. You know what I'm saying? And this was very intentionally done by the state. Just like the war on drugs was very intentional. So, we could go on to the next one. So let's talk a little bit about the Bronx. How many of you are from the Bronx? My brother over there. Oh. This is not Wakanda, by the way. This is the Bronx. All right, so I got to say that because, cultural appropriation happens. Anyway, so the Bronx in terms of the borough, was a place that received Irish immigrants, Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants at the beginning of the 20th century, 19th century. And it also saw the migration of a lot of Black Southerners, specifically from South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. And then it also saw, in the late 1930s, early 1940s, a lot of Puerto Ricans. The first waves of migration from Puerto Rico landed mostly in New York City, landed mostly in the Bronx. Now, I wanted to make this construct. Do you know who this person is? This is John F. Kennedy. Did any of you know that he was from the Bronx? I'm just putting it out there. Not that I'm proud of that shit, but he's from the Bronx. Listen, we could debate that. I got pictures of his elementary school graduation and shit. Yeah, bruh. And does anybody know what this is? Because most people don't know what this is. The Bronx slave market. Carla, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Bronx slave market? Hold on, you got to use the mic for this because this has to be heard.
Thanks. Yeah, so.
I hope so.
Okay. So the Bronx slave market is a place where women, mostly Black women, Black Caribbean women, would gather on Jerome Ave, I think on 174th in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And basically affluent, coded for rich white women from mostly Long Island, would come and pick up domestic workers.
These people would go there.
To go pick up women to work, right? Mm-hmm. To do the chores for the day, the child care. And it's called the slave market because it was Black women, but also they got paid pennies.
Yep.
If paid at all.
That's right.
But mostly pennies.
So some comrades from the CPUSA of that time, yes. So Ella Baker experienced that. There's another comrade whose last name is Cook, Marvel Cook, who also wrote about that in CPUSA materials. And so I wanted to make, because it's like the tale, people talk about the tale of two cities. Like if you were in any borough in New York, there's two parts to the story. There's a side that is a very working class, poor, I will work for you. And then there's another one that actually is reaping the benefits of other people's work. And you could, I worked in Washington Heights for a while. Broadway was that division for us. All right, next. So the South Bronx is burning. Do you know what president this is? Yeah, there were two presidents actually from the United States that visited the South Bronx during that period, and it was Jimmy Carter, and then the other one was Ronald Reagan. Interesting, right? But luckily, we were redeemed, and in 2005, we received Chavez. And 10 years before that, we got Fidel, so I'm okay with that. That's the history I want to reclaim. There's two links here. Vijata, take it away. A Decade of Fire. No, the other one. There's two links. Can you link on the top? And we're just gonna see like the first couple of seconds to this.
We grew up in rubble. We grew up with burnt out decay all over us. The South Bronx was burning down around us, and nobody seemed to know why.
Everything south of the Cross Bronx Expressway, they just let it burn, and nobody gave a damn.
And all of a sudden, neighborhoods just went whoosh, gone.
Nobody's aware of the fact that we got a city dump right here in the backyard.
How could city government allow this to happen? Who was in charge? Why? The story we were told, the story the...
Just so you know, there's a documentary that's called A Decade of Fire, and it's actually on YouTube, and it was on PBS before. And this is someone from the South Bronx that experienced that moment in history, and is sharing it from the perspective of someone who was born and raised in the South Bronx and was told that the fires were the fault of the residents, when in reality, it was the landlords, the owners of these buildings that were burning the buildings to be able to then get the insurance money, because there was white flight that was happening and they didn't want to just leave empty-handed. So what this did to the Bronx, to the South Bronx specifically, was eliminate 60% of the housing. 60% of the housing in the South Bronx was eliminated by these fires. And the documentary is really shocking. The person did it in 2019, or completed in 2019. It was released in 2020, but it's a good documentary to watch. So I'm gonna just keep giving y'all resources for you to keep diving into it. There's another link. I know y'all heard this. Please tell me you have. Read the lyrics.
It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
Broken glass everywhere. People pissing on the stairs, you know they just don't care. I can't take the smell, can't take the noise. Got no money to move out, I guess I got no choice. Rats in the front room, roaches in the back, junkies in the alley with the baseball bat. I tried to get away, but I couldn't get far, cause a man with a tow truck repossessed my car. Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. Standing on the front stoop, hanging out the window, watching all the cars go by, roaring as the breezes blow. A crazy lady living in a bag, eating out of garbage pails, used to be a fag hag, such a dance to tango, skipped the life and dango. A zircon princess seemed to lost her senses, down at the peep show, watching all the creeps, so she could tell her stories to the girls back home. She went to the city and got so did it. She had to get a pimp, she couldn't make it on her own. Don't push me, cause I'm close.
All right. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. I will beg people to contextualize this, right? There's a lot of language and a lot of things that now we're like, it's politically incorrect to say those things. And still in the hood, people talk this way. So I'm just putting it out there. Now, I want to ask the question, what did you get from the lyrics? I had to say that kind of like prefacing to say, what did you get from the lyrics and some of the context that was shared in the previous video? You got to use the mic because Bridgetta will kill me.
This is just, he's telling his reality. This is what he sees. And music, especially for black people, it was kind of our only outlet, from slave songs, talking about the day, talking about, one day we'll be free, one day we'll be saved, now to rap where we talk about our daily lives. And, he's talking about being on the edge. This is like, he watched his city burn in front of him, and everything's been taken away, and music is the last thing he has left.
So broken glass, prostitution, you see homelessness, lady living in a bag, right? And there's way more into the song, but it's ultimately that. It is, how do I express what the reality of my community is? And the MC or the MCs to that track were doing precisely that, being the voice of that community and expressing, putting that out in the context of a space that was being burnt and was being dismissed by the rest of the world. You had something to say, Cam? Because you were holding the mic like you wanted to say something.
I was gonna pass it too if anyone else, but I was gonna say, I think there's some movie that used like the "Don't Push Me," and then it made it like sound funny or whatever. So like that's the context some people have, but I think when you really listen to it, it's like this is the verge of mental collapse, like we were talking about, and he's really reflecting the devastation of the neighborhood in all ways, like the buildings, the people's minds, just like neoliberalism has left and abandoned, all of these communities to fend for themselves.
Another thing that I think is important to raise here, which I thank you for bringing that, is the fact that, and sociologists, I'm not just, I'm not a hip hop scholar. I'm not. I love hip hop, but I'm not a hip hop scholar. I am an educator. I am very interested in knowing what my community is and why it is. And so that's why this. But a lot of sociologists have determined, and Marxists know, I'm just trying to be funny about it, but it's not really funny, that one of the things that happens when poverty rises is what? Crime. And a lot of those crimes are crimes of what? Survival. People trying to live because they've been abandoned by the system, right? And so when we're talking about that song, we're talking about an abandoned community that is trying to find a voice, that is trying to find visibility. We're also talking about a very specific population. At that time, the South Bronx was majorly composed of people between the ages of 5 and 34. 5 and 34. I mean, I know I was called old earlier. Where's Carla? But and I am. But And I'm okay with that. But 5 to 34, we're talking about kids, youth, young adults, people that are still in development. We're talking about the hip hop culture. It was created by young people in rebellion, young people that refused to be silenced, people that refused to make themselves invisible. We could go on to the next slide. Oh, no, not the link, because we already done that. All right. The criminalization of poverty. So, this is very dear to my heart. If you go to the 41st precinct in the Bronx, in the South Bronx specifically, Fort Apache, you will find that there is an engravement. I mean, there's been a lot of waters and a lot of rains and a lot of shit that has happened in the world, but that hasn't changed. Engraved in the concrete, there is something that has arrows pointing to the present. And then it has some sort of fort that's built. This is engraved in the concrete. You could find it. And it is because the 41st precinct was known to be Fort Apache. Because the people that were living in the South Bronx were considered animals. And so the criminalization of poverty looks like Hollywood making a film called Fort Apache with the whitest men you could find, surrounded by Black and Latino people, under the tagline of a war zone, Fort Apache. So do you see how culture works? We're gonna make this Hollywood movie that is gonna reach the masses to say that the South Bronx is a community of hoodlums and animals. When in reality, what you had was this. At any moment in time, there were a community of Black and brown people. There was profiling that was happening. There were physical attacks that was happening. Police brutality in many different levels was happening. And you also had folks resisting that. So this is a committee against Fort Apache. And it's very interesting because, does anybody know who this person is? Give it you once, give it you twice. All right. This person is Richie Perez. Does anybody know who Richie Perez is? Richie Perez was the chief and editor of the Palante, Siempre Palante newspaper of the Young Lords. He was an organizer, born and raised in the Bronx. It's a Puerto Rican family. And they were organizing themselves against that type of repression. So you also saw Black Panthers, Young Lords, with a mixture of also street organizations, or what people call gangs. There's a lot of gangs in that moment. You were raising your hand.
At the request of the community, people from the political movement would go to the sites where Fort Apache was being shot with whistles and disrupt the shooting again and again and again. They did put it together, though, but I'm not sure how, because we were there all the time.
Well, you know how? They were very stubborn about making sure that they would make poor people look like animals. They were stubborn and intentional about that. But there was always resistance. And hip hop was part of that culture. We're gonna get there. Vegeta, take it on. Robert Moses. I just want to put the criminals out there, you know what I'm saying? He's one. Does anybody know who Robert Moses was? He was no Moses, though. He didn't part no. He did some other shit. He did part, but he did some other shit. And okay, we're going. Who was Robert Moses? Not just the highway.
He was like an urban planner. He was not a city official. He was not democratically elected, but he had a lot of power in the infrastructural design of New York. So he built a lot of the highways to bring white people from Long Island into Manhattan, through Manhattan, from upper New York. yeah, he demolished a lot of neighborhoods in the Bronx with the Cross Bronx Highway, Expressway. Yeah, so he destroyed New York essentially.
Somebody said he was the original gentrifier. Yes, he is part of that lineage. So one thing to think about is that he was not like a state official. He was not a government official, right? But he did get a lot of contracts. He made a lot of wealth by doing what was necessary to keep capitalism thriving. When you think of the South Bronx, people think about people for like the jungle, concrete, nobody wants to be there, all that. But people forget that there's a working class that has always been there. And one of the key points of the South Bronx is what? AOC went at some point there and did a little thing. Is what? I mean, Hunts Point, but what is in Hunts Point? Like, what is the strategic value of the South Bronx? Why do people need to go into the South Bronx? There are factories, but there is a food market. The food market that feeds the rest of New York City is in Hunts Point. It's in the South Bronx. It has a strategic value because it is also at the center. It connects all the boroughs. So when Robert Moses was thinking about this, he was like, what is the best thing that I could possibly build where people could pass by the Bronx without having to enter the Bronx? And if they do have to enter, they could leave easily. Vijata? All right, so this is a connection to all the boroughs. But this was built on the back of almost 2,000 families that were displaced. 2,000 families displaced. And that's in the lower number. So in order, like if this is not violence, I don't know what is. Violent as fuck. And this was not only Robert Moses, but the mayor of the time, the city officials of the time were complicit with the creation of this expressway that made the people of the South Bronx ever more so invisible. And we can't talk about the levels of asthma that has created for the people in the Bronx today. So if we want to understand the issues of asthma and the issues around housing, we got to learn this history. These are key to learning that history. So who was in the Bronx? I mean, I had to put the salseros right here. You're saying because we were there. I promise you we were. So who is in the Bronx? What we're seeing, again, in the Caribbean and Latin America, we're seeing a lot of repression, a lot of persecution, a lot of social and economic instability. So you have a lot of migration. People call it migration, but this is forced migration. So you have a lot of socioeconomic and political exiles that are coming to the South Bronx. Because one, is probably one of the most inexpensive places to be able to live in. You also have, like I said before, a lot of migration from the South. So folks from North Carolina, from Virginia, who are there. From where? You're from Virginia, from the South. But in terms of Black Caribbeans, the majority of folks were either from Jamaica, from Puerto Rico, from Barbados, Vegeta. So this is DJ Kool Herc. And DJ Kool Herc got his name because he's 6'4" and kind of has like a Hercules type of body. So the Herc is for Hercules. And he is, there's many debates, but some claim that DJ Kool Herc is the father of hip hop. One of the things that I found interesting for the context of this class, which I think, I just wanted to share with folks, was this quote. Can somebody read this quote? Where's the mic? Mic runner.
Come as you are. It's about you and I. Okay, thank you. It's about you and I connecting. Hip hop has created a lot of jobs. It has also filled the cultural gap. Do we realize how much power hip hop has? It has banded together people around the world. DJ Kool Herc.
There's more. There's another book that I think would be good for folks to, if you want to know more. Won't Stop, Can't Stop. His last name is Chang. I forgot. Jeff Chang. That has a really like historiography of like the development of hip hop and some of those folks that were foundational. DJ Kool Herc, originally from Jamaica, contributed the use of the the double turntable, and the prolongation of like the break. And again, this is not like hip hop school, so I'm not gonna go into those those specificities. But I think he made huge contributions. One of the big contributions of DJ Kool Herc was throwing parties, like throwing jams. They were not called hip hop concerts or hip hop parties. They were called jams, and people came to the jams. There was a very specific jam that happened, and it happened at the request of his sister, Cindy Campbell. Cindy, and I want to raise her name up because sometimes people just think it was DJ Kool Herc, but there have always been women in hip hop. And Cindy was going back to school. At that time, there weren't only so the buildings some of them had precincts. Just small precincts that kept kept people contained. But they also had recreational spaces. And the building that they lived in on Sedgwick Avenue had a recreational hole. And so they decided to throw a party inside that recreational hole to raise funds for going back to school. Do you want to? Has anybody seen this? If you're from the Caribbean, you've seen this.
So it's really interesting. I forgot that DJ Kool Herc is from Jamaica, because in Jamaica, this is the standard for parties. It'd be like two DJs, one on one side, and they'll both be playing, and that's kind of an element that he brought over to hip hop. Yeah. And it's really interesting, the Caribbean roots of hip hop.
So the sound system is a cultural thing, but it's also a political thing. So when people are running political campaigns, they take out the sound system, and whoever has the largest sound system usually attracts the largest group of people. And so it's a very cultural, but also a very political thing. If you are in any day just wandering around Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic, you will have this shit bumping somewhere. Right now, there's a whole culture about having these type of things in your car. We could talk about how that happens later, but it happens, I promise. This is a flyer for the back to school jam. And folks, I don't know if I'm sure the Bronx tour that you all do has a 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. And they say August 11, 1973 is the day all elements came together. All the elements of the hip hop culture, and we'll talk about those now. All right, so what do we call this, people? Breaking. Breaking. And there are many breakers. There is a specific legend, I want to raise up this legendary crew of folks, which is the Rocksteady crew. But there were many others. There was folks, the Sulu Kings. There were many other breaking, and they were battle each other. I think it's important to raise. There's a really good. I'm gonna keep throwing them out. There's a really good documentary that's called "From Mambo to Hip Hop," and if you haven't watched it, you should, because it's literally showing how mambo moves were put into the floor, and the similarity of some of these moves that mambo had being used in breaking. There's a link there. Hold on, let me see if I find the timestamp though, because you shouldn't play the whole thing. And this is a documentary. Not that. It was definitely not the Leonardo da Vinci. Nothing. That is not where we're headed. I promise. All right, if you could go to the 3 second mark. No, to the 3 minute mark, sorry.
My cousin comes to me a year later and tells me, yo, Rich, you gotta come with me to the jam. I'm like, the what? The jam, man. Yo, we going off, they rocking, people breaking, got MCs, DJs, playing beats and blah, 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 all this stuff. It's not like I could think about, okay, wow, this is hip hop. No, because the word didn't exist like that yet, by definition. And I just fell in love with this environment. I was like, wow. It was the first time I ever wanted to dance without being afraid of humiliation or insecurity or shyness. That's when I felt like I was really born, when, just like witnessing breaking.
It started in the Bronx and part of Harlem. It started in Freeze's house.
Oh, shut up!
His mom used to break
The whole act in his own.
Let me talking about my mother now. Well, yeah, Billy, go. Mom used to spit on that head about my mother.
The term B-boy.
All right, so I just wanted to, I think it's important not to only speak about it, but also show some of the folks that were creating this, that did not have the sight. Like there wasn't a plan. It wasn't like, we're gonna do this and we're gonna like blow up the next day. The idea was, one, to build community, to have fun, to be seen, to be able to like validate your humanity, because you've had so many years, decades of being told that you're an animal, and you were finding creativity and building that and building a culture that at that point, maybe a lot of people didn't understand it was a resistance culture, but it is to us now. That's what we want to uplift. So the Rocksteady crew, that was Crazy Legs who spoke. There are many things. One thing that we should not do ever is glorify the hip hop culture. There is a lot of contradictions in it, just like there is contradictions in society. Every space that we go into has levels of contradictions. And I want to put that out because, you're going to go in, you're going to look for these folks, and you're going to find many contradictions, some that are not negotiable and some that you could potentially look past. So I just want to put that out there. All right, my people. Do you know who these women are? Because we got to we went through the DJs. Do you know who these women are? You know who these women are. Ah. And where is she from? Queensbridge. Because, we got to represent for other boroughs, even though the South Bronx is winning it. No, we said it from the beginning. We could have a conversation afterwards. It's okay. But this is known as like one of the first female MCs. MC Sharrock. Can you play, Vijata, the couple of, I just don't want to be the only one talking about this. Other people have talked about it, so. And she talks about it. Aw, don't tell me this. No, the link wasn't her, so it's fine if it's not there. So basically, she starts writing at 9. At 9 years old. She's from the Bronx. She was part of the Furious 4, I think, the group was called. But she is basically called the mother of hip hop. She was one of the first female rappers. And Roxanne Shante, there's a whole documentary on her trajectory as well. And I thought it would be important if we're talking about MCs. There's a lot of MCs we know. KRS-One. And if you don't know, you should know who KRS-One is, also from the Bronx. Just putting it out there. Rakim, right? Like, there's so many. But I think a lot of the times we forget that women were also part of these spaces. So MC Sharrock and Roxanne Shante. The MC was the master of ceremony. So the DJ played its role. The MC played its role. Can we go on to the next? The breakers played their role. And then you have graffiti or writing. And people will debate that on what do we call this art. The piece of it is that, or what I found really interesting. So I moved to the Dominican Republic, was taken to the Dominican Republic at the age of 3 and was brought up at the age of 10. Now, the last train to have this level of artistry, because it is art, was pulled out in 1985. And it was a campaign to clean up the city. Interestingly enough, I remember going to 42nd Street, I don't know, probably like 8 years ago. And I found myself going into the shuttle. The shuttle was wrapped around with all sorts of promotional shit. And I'm like, so this is acceptable, but that's unacceptable. And so one of the most criminalized elements of hip hop is this: vandalism. That's what it's called within the law, right? One of the most powerful things of graffiti on those trains was that people were able to see other people's names. People would sit there watching and hoping to see any of these names, because that was a way of making themselves visible to other boroughs. The highest you went, right? The craziest design. All of these things made part, again, of having people become visible in a city where you're told you're nothing. Let's go on to the next one, because I know time is... Africa Bambaataa. And it's misspelled. There's 2 A's, by the way. Here. Anybody wants to say anything? So all these elements existed. All of these elements existed. Africa Bambaataa is a founder of the Zulu Nation. There's a lot, and the brother said 2016, there's a lot that's connected to that. And there's a lot to still have the maturity and capacity to understand what people brought to the table and the contributions people made. Africa Bambaataa built what the Zulu Nation was. The Zulu Nation brought together all of the elements, and understood that building an organization was necessary for hip hop. And so the Zulu Nation, it was not only from the Bronx, it was not only New York City, it was an international organization. It continues to be, and it continues to be alive, and it continues to struggle through many different other things that have happened. And I'm not gonna mention what that is. Folks to go in and look for it. And if you have questions, I'm more than down to be in conversation with people. Nothing is to be said that is right, because it's not. However, the contribution of building an organization for people, building a territory for the displaced, regardless of where you are, hip hop met you as you were, and build an organization with the capacity to have an international reach. That's something to be acknowledged in history. Thank you. This is one of my most favorite pictures. Can someone share what they see here? What do you see?
Just a regular jam in the park. They gotta put a fan on a amplifiers to keep it from blowing out.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's 2 DJs up there, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably a MC over there.
Yeah. So you have, again, resourcefulness. It's in Harlem. It's not in the Bronx. I mean, again, we're trying to go to all the boroughs. I'm trying to keep it real. Keep it right. So you have the fan that is trying to keep out the amplifier from blowing up, basically. You have folks that are, DJing, handling the turntables, but you have these folks that are looking at all the mechanics. It's like the MacGyvers of the hood. You feel me? Like, these folks are the engineers. They're trying to make things happen. Do you know where they got their light from? Yeah, where they got the energy from. The street lamp. You plug it in, and you find a way, and you plug it into the bottom, right? And so if we think about what happens today, the other day I was like, man, I want to go see Burna Boy. Do you realize how expensive these damn tickets were? One thing about hip hop, it was that it was public. It was for everybody. It was accessible. And so the resourcefulness of our people, but also the the aspiration of being in community was there. Like you wanted to battle in community. You wanted everybody to see me whoop your ass. You wanted the cipher. You wanted the sense, the energy that is built in the collectivity, right? And that was hip hop. Can we go on to the next one? So what happens to hip hop culture? I wanted to raise these two. Run DMC happens, yeah, bro. Anyway, one thing that I always say to folks, as someone who comes from one of the poorest congressional districts, which is the South Bronx, whose parents worked regular jobs and then had gigs, is that we poor people always have the aspiration to progress. And the way that we understand progress, unfortunately, is not in the sense of a socialist progress, because we haven't been taught that. We're taught progress from whose perspective? Capitalism, right? So we want a piece of the pie. We want a seat in the table. We don't want to like do away with the pie. We don't want to break the, and I want to kind of hone on that a little bit, because that's where we start if we want to really organize and move people from that space to a collective space. We move people understanding where people are to where we understand we all should be, which is thinking about that collectivity, thinking about what it means to build things that are going to be beneficial to an entire class of people, not just some people. What happened with hip hop is what happened with rock and roll. Because I also hear that a lot of people are like, you know, these sellouts. What happened with hip hop is what has happened historically with cultures of resistance. There's a cooptation. There's an understanding that someone can make a buck out of that. And so you go from being a slave in the hood to being some sort of slave in an industry. And a lot of these folks that actually went into that mainstream at that moment are not the folks that people are listening to right now. They made money, but they haven't been making money. A lot of these folks took tours to Europe, travel the world, and are broke as hell. Melly Mel, Grandmaster Flash, like all of these folks are still living in the South Bronx and doing and taking all sorts of gigs because other people made a lot of money on their backs. Okay? And so I wanted to bring this, look, you see how non-sectorial I am. These folks are from Jersey, yo. They are from Englewood, New Jersey. Does anybody know who they are? Sugar Hill Gang. Do you know why they mark a shift in hip hop? They were the first produced. The first to actually be made mainstream was a Sugar. Now, can we listen to the lyrics of this song? I mean, I love it. I love it. But you know what I'm saying? The lyrics are not.
Hyundai Tucson versus Honda CR-V.
And I mean, even more so, I said even more so though, is that you see a lot of like documentaries and the like, and they consider this the beginning of hip hop and not all the history that we had seen previously.
I mean, this is where like mainstream, like the first, and it was at the top 40 chart for a while. Like this was like the hit. Go ahead, Vegeta. Hit us with the Sugar Hill Gang. Listen to this. Listen to the lyrics.
I said the hip hop, the hip it to the hip hop, you don't stop the rocker to the bang bang boogie. Say up jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie to beat. Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. You see, I am
am Wonder Mike, and I'd like to say hello. To the black, to the white, the red, and the brown, the purple, and yellow. But first, I gotta bang, bang, the boogie to the boogie. Say up, jump the boogie to the bang, bang, boogie. Let's rock. You don't stop, rock the rhythm that'll make your body rock. Well, so far you've heard my voice, but I brought two friends along. And next on the mic is my man Hank. Come on, Hank, sing that song.
Check it out, I'm the CASN, the OVA, and the rest is FLY. You see, I go by the code of the doctor of the mix, and these reasons I'll tell you why. You see, I'm 6'1" and I'm tons of fun, and I dress to a T. You see, I got more clothes than Muhammad Ali, and I dress so viciously. I got bodyguards, I got two big cars that definitely ain't the whack. I got a Lincoln Continental and a some new Cadillac. So after school, I take a dip in the pool, which is really on the wall. I got a color TV so I can see the Knicks play basketball. Hear me talking about checkbook, cause it costs more money than a sucker could ever spend. But I wouldn't give a sucker or a punk from the rock and not a dime till I made it again. Everybody go, hotel, motel, what you gonna do today? Is I'm gonna get a fly girl, gonna get some.
I mean, I think it's a very catchy song. I mean, I'm like hip hop, you know what I'm saying? I know the words, but can somebody share what the lyrics are? Like what are the lyrics about? He got the mic.
You mentioned it's no Melly Mel. This is in stark contrast to Melly Mel. Because one is commercial and one is the voice of the hood.
That's right. That's right. And it's Will Smith. But it's very much about, and again, this is not for us, and the brother had his hand up over there, but this is not about us making a judgment. The aspiration of progress is taught to us by those who exploit us, right? And so it's like hearing Cardi B. I love Cardi B. But if you hear Cardi B when she's talking about, I'm not a worker, what that's trying to tell us, if we kind of read into what she's saying, is I'm in power now. Because what I understand to be in power is a boss. Does that make sense? And so we need to kind of understand that language to not become judgmental of it. Because a lot of what happened also with hip hop was that you had folks from the NAACP that were coming up and saying, hip hop is the tournament, that's the enemy, this is, when in reality, the enemy was a system and it has always been the system. It's not hip hop. The brother had his hand up.
I just wanted to mention about the whole Grandmaster Caz thing. I don't know if you want to explain it better than me.
I think we're gonna, because we have time, like a time constraint, but I think the comrades in the room who are doing the hip hop series should take up your information, especially if you're like doing education work utilizing hip hop, because that's part of what we're going to be talking about. But I appreciate that. I think it's important to understand the shifts in that context, because a lot of the times they're like hip hop culture and we want to romanticize what it is, but it brings all of the baggage of working class people. And for us to be real about this, we have to be right about this too. Like, it brings a lot of the contradictions. And so the desires, the aspirations of people to seek progress are exploited by capital. And so what happens with Run DMC? They fill up the Madison Square Garden, and then there are some corporate moguls back there, and they hear him sing the song. Vegeta, hit me with the song.
It's a good day to have a good
Dunkin'.
day.
It's not a good day to have Dunkin', even though I drank my Dunkin' coffee. That's part of my contradiction. So the Adidas song, Run DMC, that crew, was the first crew to get major sponsoring by a corporation. Like Adidas, that was Adidas' theme song. Now, the people who created hip hop as a culture might not have had the foresight to see how big its reach would be. But capitalists did. And not only the reach that it would have, but the power that it had to be able to bring people together. And if you have black and brown, poor people together, what happens? What does the state usually think is going to happen? A riot. That's the reason why in the 90s, they literally made laws for people not to hang out in a corner in New York City. Giuliani did that. Well, yeah, since Jim Crow, but here in New York City, when we're talking about like actually having a law passed, it was during the times of Giuliani. And any color, it didn't matter, like any color you were was associated with some sort of gang. If you were black and brown. You know, profiling became a thing. And yes, it was a continuation of Jim Crow. It was a continuation of slavery. It was a continuation of having control and dominance of people by the state. Are things any different today? They're not. And the target continues to be who? Poor people, right? And so when people say, you know, my life was changed, my life was transformed, our perception of ourselves and our communities might have been transformed through hip hop culture, but the state, the system continues to be the same. And that's something that we need to have really clear. That is why, can we go on to the next one? Just because I want to have like a couple minutes for folks to respond. I think it's, I wasn't going to quote myself, but I wrote it down. And the reason that I wrote it down is because it's a real thing. A lot of the times we kind of dismiss the role of political organization. It's like we produce art and we produce culture and that's our contribution. And that's great. That is great. On the individual tip is great. But what does that do to the collective in general? Rap is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Right now you have Jay-Z and Rihanna at the top. What has that actually meant for black people in this country? What has it meant for black people around the world? It has not meant liberation. And so if we think that art and culture is the only thing that is going to get us free, we got this shit wrong. Because the capitalists will easily co-opt whatever creation we make if we're not part of a political organization. And so can someone read this, please?
Art and culture are a key intervention toward revolution, and political organization is the engine. Art and culture are not a substitute for organized struggle, but rather it is at the heart of organized struggle. We do believe that if taken seriously, arts and culture can be a core element and vehicle to advance our political work.
And I'm going to leave it there, and we could probably have 5 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes, if folks want to reflect a little bit of again, not a hip hop scholar. I just happen to read a lot of shit and work with a lot of young people that actually were hip hop artists, specifically around the area of political education and making meaning of what the hip hop culture was and how it was dismantled to build something that works against us. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate your presentation. You did very well. You get an A. And you know how we do. So like, me and my son was in a meeting a few weeks ago with KRS. He just rented an apartment at 1520 because of plans to put a permanent exhibit on the birthplace of hip hop in the same community center room where the birth of hip hop occurred. So as everybody should have heard, the 50th anniversary of hip hop, there's so much going on. But I'm going to give you the DL, you know, straight from the Bronx, straight from the street, straight from the hood. On August 12th, after the big Yankees stadium concert that Nas is doing, KRS-One is doing an event in the hood on Sedgwick Avenue, you know, to celebrate the birth of hip hop. And everybody here is invited. Thank you so much. Okay? Yeah, also I want to say that if you want to go to one of the jams that she was talking about, a real hip-hop jam, there's a really good one coming up. I would recommend coming to the Bronx to Crotona Park on July 20th, because every Thursday this month, the best DJs in the world, which are the best DJs in New York City, the older, the younger, are going to be there's going to be DJing back-to-back DJs the whole time. So it's going to be really cool.
The name of the Park Jams, Tools of War, puts it together. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else wants to say, hey,
I got you right here.
Like, a lot of people in America seem like they are so sleep that everything goes over everybody's head. And the same thing that they did to the poorest people in the time of slavery, they're doing to all of America now.
That's right.
Before everybody woke up. Because this whole country was supposed to be started over representation for our taxes. And the whole tax thing was supposed to have been illegal to tax us. Okay, we paying rent, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, gas, you name it, to keep up with the Joneses, and then we're left with nothing.
That's right. Yeah.
And now we got the young generation growing up, still lost, and it's like, it's more of everyone becoming an individual that got us lost than anything else, because together we're strong, and divided, we're not families, we're not communities, we're not anything if we're not together. We're all we got, and we don't even realize it.
That's right. I think it's like one thing that you brought up that just makes me think is when we're talking about neoliberal policy. Sorry, it's late and I need another coffee. Neoliberal policies at the beginning. The amounts of jobs that were unionized jobs that were lost in this country, it is bananas. Crazy during that period. And the function that a lot of the unions took after that is also bananas, because a lot of the unions took the task of funneling people to the Democratic Party. That was kind of like the task. And pinning unions against each other. We don't have enough money to be able to do this, but we could do that. People fighting for their own contracts and not fighting collectively was also part of the neoliberal process and how it was impacting jobs and workers in the United States, leaving people very vulnerable to exploitation, and having the gig economy also increase. So people that were having full-time jobs that then had to have several gigs on the side to be able to survive. That is the same shit we're experiencing today. Very few people only have one job. Very few people. And so it makes you question too, what's the role of the government if it's not to take care of their people? That's a huge question. And so the capitalist government that we are forced to live in is precisely to take. It's not to give. It's not to give the benefits that we need, the very basic human or civil rights that we need. And so what do? I think from every aspect of our, like from every and any space of our lives, how many of you are actually artists and cultural workers here? How many of you are educators? How many of you are just simple workers in the most ordinary gig economy world? Right? I think everyone here is at least 2 or 3 of those categories. From any space in which we find ourselves, the only thing that will save us is that collective spirit, is organizing, is coming together, is building community. And hip hop had that potential. We could debate in terms of whether it has it now, but it had that potential because it brought a lot of people together to be able to express themselves in a way that, again, gave humanity and visibility to people who had not had it. And so I want to thank y'all for the space and time to be able to share some of these pebbles of knowledge. I know that I know you have something to say. I'm just gonna end the class because they're streaming it, and then if folks want to stay back and engage in conversations, folks are more than welcome to. But thank you all so much for coming, and come back for the next series.